and welcome. I'm Piers, Ridyard, CEO of RDX Works, a core developer of the decentralized finance protocol Radix, a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. Today, this is a roundtable, but it's just with me and our CTO, Russell Harvey. How are you doing, Russell?
Special day. No one else has gotten a one-on-one roundtable. Who else could meet this need? Who has the knowledge necessary?
Exactly.
That just
it's not
two
so
could
much a
cover all the
roundtable
things
anymore, just like a game of ping pong. It's more like a square table than a round. It's more like
or
a
just
line.
make it like
It's
an
a line.
interrogation. Put a bright light on me, and then we can get with the questioning.
So today, in fact, literally just half an hour ago / an hour ago, Babylon RCnet V2 is now live. So what does that mean, Russell?
And I should say today we mean as of time of this recording. I know we have processing time, so when you watch this will have been on July 6th is when this all happened. So RCnet 2 is formed into two phases, and the first phase went out today. And the first phase is getting the network running, all the low-level pieces. That's the new version of the node, Radix engine, and Scrypto. And the big news around it is that Scrypto is now feature complete. And for those that don't have a software development background, feature complete broadly means all the things you want in are in. There are still things to optimize, things to adjust a little bit, bugs to fix, that sort of thing. So the next phase would be getting on to code complete, where you've done all the things that you believe for those tweaks are done. And then finally, of course, you go to release. But this is a major milestone, and we have packed a ton of features into this. This is certainly the last major release that Scrypto will have ahead of the Babylon launch.
Right.
And a lot of them were in response
to this is very
community
exciting
feedback.
It's Scrypto V1, right?
No. This is
Scrypto
0.10. This is not 1.0. This is
0.10.
0.10. You can't think of it like it's decimal numbers, right? Versioning is it's just 0.9 is not followed by 1.0. It's followed by 0.10. Right. So, but this is the last one that has a bunch of major functionality change, syntax changes, all that sort of thing. From here on out, it's just small tweaks and fixes.
Okay. And so let's go through the what's new in Scrypto, because I think there's some really exciting things. And obviously, let's start with the biggest thing, which is the redesign of the authentication developer interface. I think this is something that would be great to get a little bit more understanding on, because I know we talked about it when we did the delay. So it'd be good to sort of get a bit more understanding of like what we've changed and what makes it so good now.
Sure. I mean, let's start with the reason for it, which is we were doing an investigation of examples submitted by the community and even by internal staff at RDX Works. And we were noticing that you had pretty regularly people were making a small mistake in setting up their permissions. They were setting up cases where a component they were going to deploy might have it so anybody in the world could update the metadata on that component and change stuff like the description or the name, stuff that's shown in the dashboard to people about, what is this component if I type in the address. Or they were setting it up so that stuff could never, ever be changed by anybody. And they probably would want to do things like later on, adjust the description of it or give a new web URL for people who want to go read about it. So this provoked some deeper thought on what was best to solve this. And in looking at the cases that were being used, we found that everything broke down into one of three approaches for what application developers needed in building out their components. Either they had a thing where they had absolutely no need for privileged access whatsoever. It was kind of a simple thing that just ran, and they had no need to engage with the auth system at all. Or you had very commonly cases where you have kind of like a single admin role. You could think of it as, look, the general public can get at almost all the methods on it, but maybe this thing claims a fee from all its users, and I just need somebody who's able to go in and access this privileged admin method or just claim the royalties or something like that. And that pattern was so common that we needed to address that in a way that it would be completely easy to set up for that, as that definitely was the 90% case in what we were finding. And then the third one was applications that were complicated enough where you had multiple different actors in the system, not just public and single admin. You had things like different kinds of staff roles. And so we wanted to meet all three of these needs in a way that, depending on where you were in that little need hierarchy, you had the simplest possible interface to get set up and running, and you had no chance of making the mistakes that we were seeing that were leading to things like your permissions would not be fully configured. And this took quite a few iterations to get to something that met all these things, but we're finally there, and I really think it's beautiful and elegant, and it unifies the feeling of how you set up your permissions for all the things that manage how resource rules work, like who's allowed to mint, is minting even allowed, that sort of thing. It now follows the same role-based system that the components do. And it's this, we've achieved greatness now, but it certainly took a lot of times to cut it into the correct shape. It took a lot of iterations to make it where it's like, this finally feels correct and something that we'll be happy to live with forever.
And for people who are not like developers, who do not deal with maybe security on a regular basis, why is authentication so important, and why is granular like setting up of authentication so important in the first place when dealing with public ledgers, or indeed when dealing with secure applications in any form?
I mean, obviously, we have a legion of things on rec.io for what happens when authentication is not set up correctly. And what we saw from other networks is they were all taking this approach of you just hand roll it for every application based on who is the signer of the ultimate transaction. They have these cascading schemes of who's calling me and who was the signer and all this. And they build this bespoke system for every application to try to handle the concept of authorization. And it's very hard to get right. And it's very hard to think of all the edge cases ahead of time. This is what led us to create our core model of authentication, which goes away from who's signing it or who's calling me, and the system of badges where you can basically show, hey, I possess this authority, go ahead and let me into the privileged method or whatever it is. So this redesign now, the importance was on, we love our system of authority via showing of badges, and there's is the proper authority present. The part that we found was not done exactly right was, how do I configure my component or resource to recognize the correct authorities? And so that's now cleaned up, and it's now very, very easy to set up a flexible authority system that doesn't paint you into the corner if you do have a complicated application that you expect might have changing needs down the line. But it's become much more approachable and intuitive if you have a simple case of like having the single admin for your component.
Okay.
And you get sensible defaults. You can think of it as giving you sensible defaults all the times whenever you have a use case that needs authorization.
The stupid analogy I always use is like, when you're setting up new users on a computer, you don't want to give those new users admin rights by default. And the way that you set up your rights to be able to access things on a computer, there's been good patterns that have emerged out of that for basic computer security. What we're now talking about is much more complicated systems where you need to be able to program granularly the rights in which people can administer potentially hundreds of millions of dollars. And so you want the way in which that gets set up to be as intuitive as possible, because ultimately code security is not just does the code run securely, it's whether or not the way in which it has been configured is also secure as well. And that's what this redesign was all around.
Yeah. And user systems are what we base this around. We're now a role-based authorization system, much like you configuring computer systems, where I don't necessarily say, this is Piers and he should have the following permissions. I say, this is an RDX Works employee role. I configure what permissions of that role are, and then I add Piers or subtract Piers from that role if he well, I hope Piers is not planning to leave RDX Works, but that would be the case of you're not doing this on an individual level for, say, how does Piers represent that he is Piers? It's that I assign permissions to the role of RDX team, and then I can manage the membership of that team easily. And that's much more straightforward. It's easier to get it right every time, particularly when we get to applications that are moving to levels of complexity where you do have a staff that's administering parts of the system and you need to add people and remove people from that staff.
Right. And these are all this is what I would call the non-naive implementation. So like every time that you see an implementation by someone who has never built a business application, most of the naivety comes from the complexity of what an organization actually looks like, from the point of view of how you have separation between, roles and permissions, how you often have separation between, for example, in finance, between trade and execution and settlement, and like all of these different ways in which you will set up things to make sure that you don't end up having one party or one key having absolute control. You want to have all of these ways in which you can create organizations where governance can be applied in a way that is mature. And I think that this is, again, what makes Radix and this authorization system stand apart, is because it is very much not the naive approach to how you should do authentication. It is very much the mature approach to how you do authentication, so that people can build good governance systems and how they exercise control within applications as well. I'm going to move on to the next point, which is native pools and pool units, which is really exciting. I get particularly excited about this because I'm very excited about liquid staking. But what are native pools and pool units, and why are they exciting?
I mean, the easiest reference for this is for those that have seen RadFi, we displayed a preview where you have within your wallet, you can see, here's all my fungible tokens. And there's a separate category that says, here are my LP tokens, which are liquidity pool tokens. And for those unfamiliar with the concept, it's an extraordinarily common pattern in decentralized finance, where you have multiple contributors that put into a pool. It might be a single resource pool. It might have two. It might have 3, 4, 5, whatever. And there's a pattern that emerged where you contribute to that pool and you get back some kind of redemption claim, which is normally an LP token, a liquidity provider token that says, this is your right to claim back some percentage of that pool in the future. And while you're holding that thing, those pool's contents are shifting in some way, but you're later able to go back and get your share back out of that pool. This has become so common and ubiquitous. We said the network absolutely needs a way to enshrine this as a core concept, and for third-party tools, off-ledger tools like the wallet, to recognize those and to give us the option to do things like provide guarantees that you can do that redemption. So the native pools that are now available, there's one for single resource, one for two, and one for multi. They have, not only do they provide an implementation of this concept, so you don't have to write that boilerplate code over and over again to create a pool, it also guarantees things such as like the redeem method always has to be publicly accessible, and that can't be changed. So that at any time, you can't have someone who does, an effective rug pull where they suddenly close off the ability to turn in your LP tokens again. If someone wants to code up a custom liquidity pool that had such an ability, they of course could do that, but it would not be recognized, say, by the wallet as being an official pool unit, and so it wouldn't get this special treatment. So this is one that I'm hoping will get adapted very, very quickly by everyone. We're really excited to have it in, and we'll have some follow-up individual articles on how to get this configured, but we already have an example with Radiswap, which is our standing example for this, that shows how to do a two-resource pool.
So this is sort of standardizing one of the DeFi primitives that you see everywhere,
completely
of LPing. But now they're also transparent in the wallet, which I love, right? Because now I can see in my wallet, not only does when I LP into any pool that uses these standard components, do I see that LP token immediately, I also see what's inside that LP token immediately, what it's redeemable for. And I can see that within my wallet. And the amount of confidence that's going to give people is unreal. And then, of course, your liquid staked. Yeah.
And just think of, you don't have to go to some website to get this information that says, what was my LP token address for this, and all that sort of thing. It's just right there in the wallet because it's natively understood. And this was one of those things that when we did our testing with users, this was enormous for people who are already DeFi activated to go, this right here is the biggest game changer I've seen yet. Right, just that recognition we're always going for, that your stuff feels like your stuff. You can recognize what's in your wallet. You know what its value is and all that sort of thing. This is an enormous contributor to that.
I'm also, sort of very excited to see now that this standard component is going to be out, and this is how we're going to be implementing liquid stake units on top of Radix as well, so that when people stake their Radix tokens to a validator, it emits a pool unit token, because this is going to be out now, and people and the community has that tool available to them. They can also start working out how they can incorporate it into their applications that they're looking at launching as well, which means that we're going to see liquid stake units implemented and integrated into the Radix ecosystem earlier than we were previously expecting, which is awesome as well.
To be 100% clear, the validator itself does not kick out exactly this pool unit. It doesn't use the exact same underlying native component because it has this redemption delay, where when you turn it in, there's an unstake period. So it functions exactly the same under the hood. It uses the same mechanics, but it isn't literally the same native blueprint. Just for if the devs watching that go in to go look at the validator implementation, like, hey, you don't actually use pool. It's like, yes, we use something extraordinarily similar, but the wallet will recognize it as such. That can be baked in to say, yep, this is another type of pool.
Got it. Next one is fee table adjustments. I think that this is actually a really interesting one, because a lot of people have been asking, how do I reason about fees on Radix? And so this in here, what does that mean? What does fee table adjustments mean for people wanting to reason about the cost of their application?
Sure. And this is one that has been, we basically did a initial fee table release with AlphaNet, and the numbers weren't quite fully randomly generated, but they were very, very close to arbitrary. And what we've been doing in the meantime is a number of exhaustive testing on various different compute configurations, memory configurations, and the like, for what is the actual compute cost of doing certain low-level operations. And now with this fee table update, what we have done is we have tuned our the item we use for tracking how much does an operation cost is called a cost unit. And we have tuned the relative cost units of things such that, doing this calculation versus this other calculation, which requires different operations, you can see the correct relative fee costs of those things. And that has, obviously, that helps direct for people that are wanting to say, which approach should I take in doing my calculations or my computation? They can now have confidence that what they're doing will, they can see the consequences of taking one approach or another from a fee perspective. The part that's still to come is we are doing also benchmarking on things that if you're increasing ledger state size, like I'm writing stuff to state, not just temporary things. Those parts, those costings are midway through. We didn't get those in for RCnet 2, but that's ongoing, and we'll get those in as soon as we have them, certainly for an upcoming RCnet v3. And the last part I want to be sure everybody understands is our tweaking has been on the relative costs of different cost units. It has not been on, well, what does that mean as far as costs in XRD? That's still, what you're paying in tokens for the fee is just arbitrarily at the moment set to 10 XRD as the max transaction. Cost per cost unit is basically arbitrary. That will also come with a tweak with certainly no later than RCnet v3, so that you can do those final steps to when I go live in Babylon, brass tacks, what do we think in XRD it's going to cost to, say, run a simple transaction with my component? So those are still to come. Yeah. But this gives people a lot to chew on as far as what should my implementation approach be.
And if you were going to compare the way in which, gas cost calculations are done in Ethereum and how cost calculations are done here, or how fees work on Radix, what would you say the sort of the biggest similarities and differences are?
I mean, the biggest similarity is that you are paying per instruction that you execute ultimately. And if you run out of your gas on Ethereum or your locked fee reserve on Radix, then your transaction ceases executing. That's the same, and that's pretty much universal. The big difference is that we have been able to abstract away this bit of the signer must pay the fee to a thing where you have at any point in the transaction execution, anybody can call an instruction that says, hey, I want to lock some XRD from this vault for the purposes of paying the fee. And that can have multiple payers for it. And none of those payers need be the signer. And it has made it so essentially, as your transaction's executing, at any time, the fee reserve can be topped up further if more is required and the appropriate party is there to do so. And that the person initiating the transaction need not be involved at all in fee paying if you want to do something like host a service where you just pay fees on behalf of your users and you charge them by credit card every month. Or, hey, if you use my system and you're making profitable things, I will pay your fees on your behalf as a little nice step for you.
Which actually, for me, the use case that instantly I'm like, that's exactly what I'm going to do, is I have one wallet that has my Radix tokens for paying fees in, and any other wallet I don't have to move tokens to. I can just be like, right, that wallet is the one that's paying for it. So I now no longer have to sprinkle everything with tokens, which I constantly have to do in Ethereum, which is a pain in the ass.
And the Radix wallet will let you do that. And of course, exchanges and other niggas are thrilled about this. They don't have to seed every little user's account with like a little bit of dust so they can pay to move the money out once, right? The only part for people to be aware of is this is a choice, because if you were to have a single account that's paying all your XRD fees and you're moving stuff into other accounts you control, anybody on Ledger observing things will go, seems like for the following 4 accounts, there's always one account that's paying the cost. And if you're happy with that, then terrific. But if you say, no, I don't want anybody to know that these accounts are associated, then you're still, of course, free to pay the fees from different ones for each one. And the wallet will let you basically choose how that goes.
Right. So just in the interest of time, I'm just going to go through a couple of the other things that are here, which is there's going to be human-recognisable transaction IDs. What does that mean?
Oh, this is just, we thought it was silly, the fact that why are transaction IDs always just this kind of string of hex characters that are basically unintelligible to anyone? Is it, what even ledger is this transaction for? So just like we have all of our accounts addresses are prefixed with account and components are component underscore something, transactions on Radix, you'll see, are always TXID underscore stuff now. And it'll be easy for people to go, oh, that's a Radix transaction when you see this string of characters on there. The back part of that is still not something a human can understand, but at least you can go, I'm looking at a Radix transaction identifier and I can see this is for mainnet, or this is, I get used to this is the Stokenet format for it, right? It's one of those things that's really simple, but it's so easy to just internally debugging to go, I can see that's on this testnet. As soon as I see the transaction ID, I don't have to go ask.
And the last thing is royalty settings allowing for a choice of flat XRD or USD-relative amounts, which means that you can either say, I want 1 XRD per time this component is used, or I want $1 per time this component is used.
Yes, and this is, I want to explain how this works so that people don't jump to, so you have a USD stablecoin releasing too? Right. We have this concept at the, baked into Radix. If you have an idea of what is the current rough multiplier of XRD to USD value. And that's the kind of thing that is updated only by doing a coordinated update to it. So basically, if it drifts too far from what looks accurate to the market, we release an update that says, okay, now that has been updated to, whatever the number of cents or dollars XRD is. By setting your fee in terms of this USD multiplier, you are then able to get a relatively stable price for it. So if you think, in my head, I want this to be about a nickel every single time you call me, then your royalties, you can set that at 0.05 USD. And the other nice thing about this system is it's now generic. The only things that are in there right now are XRD and USD. But if later we had a multiplier to say the euro, that is now trivial to add because the system is set up around the notion of I have internal calculations to say, how do I convert to different types of payment calculations? And so if later we wanted to add another multiplier, we could do so very easily.
That obviously makes a lot more intuitive sense to people as well, and that when the price of Radix moves, then being able to have that approximately stay around a benchmark in terms of dollar cost or euro cost, I think is going to be massively beneficial to developers for sure. Okay, so we're now at feature complete of Scrypto, huge milestone. We've got RCnet 2 out, which means that the node and the Radix engine has also been updated. So what coming next is Stokenet migration. What does that mean? What is Stokenet, and why is the migration important?
Sure. So Stokenet is a test network that runs the same version. It's on Olympia Stokenet. It runs the same version as Olympia mainnet. And it's just, everything on there is funny money. You can go get people to give you XRD for free on Stokenet and that sort of thing, and you can test applications. So the migration we're doing is one of network state, where we say, let's take the existing running Stokenet and let's let community validators who are planning to migrate on Babylon day one and exchanges who run nodes and the like to practice how this migration works, taking Stokenet network state and then converting it to a Babylon type network, basically saying you have an end epoch, all that state gets read and converted to Genesis for a Babylon network so that you have a smooth carryover from one to the other. This is the first public test of that. We've done it internally multiple times. And this will let people get their feet wet on how am I going to be ready for Babylon day one to make sure, particularly if I'm a validator node runner, so that I'm up and running the moment that Olympia ends and Babylon begins. And at the time that this recording goes out, I expect this will already have been completed. And we certainly will have the opportunity to do further public ones if you're not able to make this first one. But this will be a good chance to gather feedback from folks outside of RDX Works at how the migration process went and how can it be made more smooth and stuff like that. And to be clear to everyone,
go on.
Just that once the migration is done, this doesn't mean, now Stokenet's on Babylon forever, that network lives on. I mean, this network will be, after the state migration, we will shut it down probably within a few days after we're done with investigations and the like. And this is purely an ephemeral network that we're creating. We're doing a test. We'll be satisfied everything works, get feedback, and then shut it down.
So Stokenet is basically a testnet copy of Olympia, of the mainnet that's currently running, and what this Stokenet migration means is that we are actually testing the upgrade of the Olympia network to Babylon before we do the upgrade of the Olympia network to Babylon, so that all of the node runners who want to get involved in doing that can make sure that they can run the Babylon network before the Babylon network actually gets run. So this is almost like this is a dry run of the update. It's a complete dry run of the update to Babylon. So really important, and that's happening. When's that happening? When are we going to try that for the first time?
So the process is going to kick off on July 10th. Depending on how node configuration goes, maybe it's going to leak into the next day or two. Basically, what we want to do is we don't want to pull the trigger too early until we're satisfied that the node runners are ready to start the test. But ideal case, then we'll have had everybody ready and we'll have done a successful test on July 10th. But at this moment, I can't be sure if that will be the actual case or if it'll take a bit longer.
Right.
And for anybody who's wondering, why not test migrating actual mainnet? Right? Why are you doing Stokenet? I mean, the very good reason for that is that would then require, this is a migration of all the state. That would mean all the validators would be then signing on a new testnet with their real keys all the things that are going to go into production. So obviously, we would never run such a test, whereas Stokenet, they can go ahead and do this safely in a way that doesn't compromise anything in the event that someone tries to go effectively do a replay attack of the migration.
So that's happening. That's happening. That's pretty exciting. So anyone who's, I think that obviously we run it this far in advance so that we can there's wiggle room for things to go wrong, and it's a test net. So that's when you want things to go wrong, because then you get to work out what may or may not work. But yeah, I think a really good indication of network readiness already. So I think then let's talk about why if we're basically doing migration testing as of next week to Babylon of the Olympia network, but in testnet form, like why can't we? Why haven't we? Why won't we launch the network once that's successful? Like what's this big thing? And it's the gateway, right? But what's this big thing of the gateway that has created this extra like hurdle that we have to get over? And I think it'd be good to understand a bit more about what that is.
Sure. And the gateway is certainly one of the big driving factors behind it. And it isn't really well understood what the gateway does. So the network, the low level state of the network is basically it's a giant tree. There's all these little tiny pieces of information that all go up to basically a bunch of top level nodes, not nodes as in people who run, not software running the network, but nodes in the tree sense, where you have nodes that have things beneath them, and ultimately you have leaves at the bottom of the tree. And in order for off-ledger systems to be able to make sense of the network, we don't want to give them the burden of understanding this very complicated low-level state model. They need to have something that displays aggregate information that just says, the following account has the following token balances, or this transaction resulted in, the following events being emitted and stuff like that. So that is doing that, basically building that nice aggregate picture that is so useful to off-ledger systems, is the job of the gateway. And the gateway itself, in order to produce a relational database, Postgres database in this case, it has to completely comprehend all that low-level network state so that it can watch events as they happen on the network and say, oh, okay, that low-level state change means this was the cascading effect to the aggregate picture I'm trying to track in my relational database. And it has to then surface queries to people who are using, say, like an HTTP API to go say, give me the balances of my account, or give me what's the current status of this transaction, that sort of thing.
So I mean, those people who are old school enough to be familiar with Bitcoin will understand this better than I think people who are more familiar with things like Ethereum, right? So, Bitcoin has this concept of UTXO, which is unspent transaction output. And every time you spend on the Bitcoin network, what you're actually doing is you are spending the whatever state you have available to you that makes up your balance. But what makes up your balance isn't just coins. This is what I think a lot of people don't misunderstand, is when they go, oh, I own 5 Bitcoin. They don't actually own 5 Bitcoin. When a Bitcoin is mined, you have one unspent transaction output, and let's say that every block you get 10 Bitcoin, right? So you have one block that says you have 10 Bitcoin. You have an unspent transaction output of 10 Bitcoin. And now if I send Russell a Bitcoin, what I'm doing is I am sending 9 to myself, and it's often a different address on Bitcoin, but you can spend it back to yourself, and 1 to Russell. So I split the state from being 1 block to 2 blocks of state. And now every time a spend happens, you're splitting up state again. Now you can rejoin them in the Coinbase, but we don't need to talk about that. But from the point of view of just imagine every time you spend, you're taking what was a block and you're cutting it into it like a cake. You're cutting it up, and then other people are getting other bits of cake and they're kind of recombining them. But to know how much cake you've got, you're suddenly having to go back through all of these like different spends that cut up all of these different bits of state to actually know what your balance is. On Bitcoin, you don't just go, oh, my balance is 5 Bitcoin. You actually have to walk backwards through the block, through all of the history. If you're recreating your balance from scratch, you have to go through all of the history of Bitcoin to make sure that you've collected all of those little bits of cake to work out how much cake you've got, or all of the little bits of Bitcoin to work out how much Bitcoin you've got, which is actually pretty complicated. On Ethereum, you have this account-based model where you go, okay, well, there is no such thing as cutting up things into smaller bits of state. The account just knows how many coins it has. So it's like, oh, this is my account and it's got 10 coins. And then if I send one to Russell, I've now got 9 coins, and the updated state is 9 coins. I haven't split state, and I can't say that I gave Russell this particular coin versus that particular coin. I can't say which bit of cake I gave to Russell. I just deducted the concept of a fungible token from my balance. Now, so it's relatively easy on an account-based system to recreate balances, and I'm just talking about tokens here. I'm not talking about smart contract state, which is makes it all more complicated again. Now, however, account-based systems are really bad for sharding, because you can't split up state in a way that you can actually do that you can easily do things like state sharding, where you want to essentially pass across execution across multiple nodes that have different parts of that execution at different stages. Now, when you want to create a sharded network, you want to be able to do that because that's how you parallelize transactions, and that's how you're able to do lots of the things that Radix does. However, you create all of this complexity under the hood for how you recreate what something is. It's not complexity for the developer. Developer doesn't have to worry about this when they're building their decentralized application, but it is complexity for anything that is reading state off the network to try and recreate, to understand if they have the complete picture of a thing. And the reason you build it like this now is because sharding is coming. This is all being architected to make sure that Xi'an can shard completely. And so we are already dealing with the complexity of a fully sharded network from the concept of data architecture, and the gateway is being built around that, because everything that we do in Radix is about this idea of it will be sharded. We are not, every decision that we've made on how we've architected things has been around this idea of how do you make sure that it does shard, and it shards effectively, and it shards without creating bottlenecks in some other way that would have been an easier route to go if you go from non-sharded to sharded without going, well, we actually need to think about what sharding looks like in the long run.
I mean, I want to be a little cautious for people who are the crypto space, the distributed ledger space has, I think they perceive this false sense of early maturity in it. And you see definitions that come up like everything is either UTXO based or account based. And this means this or this. And that's it. That's all. What we have is, and UTXO being what you described, it's like you have this emergent final state. Like what is the current state that's emergent from all these things in it? We have some slightly hybrid concepts. So I want to be a little cautious of people just running down the road to reading about UTXO and going, oh, this means all these properties apply to Radix, right? And you'll see many like medium.com articles that act like it's authoritative. That's it. This is now, the science is fixed. You're either UTO or UTXO or account, and you can apply all these following properties based on which one you are. As with every other thing, don't think that way for Radix. Radix is a unique and novel beast that takes the best from all over the place to do impossible things. So I just want to be slightly cautious, because I can see people going nuts after hearing that. So like, okay, so UTXO, that means all the following properties. And now we have Twitter arguments over like, hey, you're so focused on a definition of UTXO that doesn't really apply here. It's the only bit I'll say to be careful of on that. But generally, you can think of it, what we're going for at the gateway is exactly that, of assembling of these low-level details into that aggregate picture, which is what off-ledger is what I want in order to do my work, so that my Explorer functions correctly and gives me my balances and all those sort of things.
And so why is that? Yeah, why does that make the gateway hard?
Well, it's because every single time that the folks on the engine side of things are like, hey, I see a cool way to optimize this, to make this more performant. Or, this is just, let's re-architect a little bit how we store this because I think it'll have nice properties at Xi'an or something like that. Every single time that happens, Gateway comes to a screaming halt on its ability to ingest low-level state because now the low-level state has changed in how it works. And then everybody who's downstream of the gateway, such as the folks working on the Radix wallets and the Radix dashboard and some other tooling, go, gateway doesn't work. I need this new version for this engine change that I want. But until the gateway's up, I'm unable to do anything. So gateway is constantly having to react to anything that has any change to low-level network state has to be comprehended fully, because obviously it has to give accurate information to the picture. And then everything in the relational database, there might be updates to the schema that are necessary to incorporate this new way of storing things. And then we still have to get to, but this thing's got to be queryable. And the demands of queries are very, very, very depend upon who's wanting it. The Radix wallet wants one set of queries. Certain app developers want different queries for their particular use cases. And when you're setting up a database, the easiest thing is to say, what should it be good at? What do I index for? What do I tune for? How do I set up my schema so that I'll be good at the things you tell me to be good at? And unfortunately, it's extraordinarily difficult to say. You can't say be good at everything, right? It's impossible. You have to optimize for some things. And so getting that, being able to serve the needs of many different masters and many different use cases in a way that you can still be performant is very, very difficult to achieve. And it causes we'll have discoveries on how usage patterns are going based on how it's being used on, say, RCnet or internal things in the wallet, and go, you know what? This actually, in order to optimize for this, we're going to have to do a schema change, which is going to have some big ramifications to everything else. Then all queries have to be retested, query plans examined again, and all this. So the smallest bit of change at the low level can cause big cascading effects down the line where the gateway has to stop, comprehend everything, re-optimize, and then only then can we have things downstream are sometimes blocked in resuming work. And so in particular, this has been the case where padding all the low-level network stuff into shape has gone quite well. And we're now at the point where we're getting to that, stability is very, very close on the low-level state. Now there's no more giant sweeping changes coming. And Gateway just needs time to comprehend those things, adapt to those things, and then that will also allow the downstream items, like the wallet and the dashboard, to have time to target a stable gateway. So they too can be on day one of Babylon, fantastic, wonderful, smooth user experience, very delightful, all those sorts of good things. It's not just a case of, okay, the network runs, I guess we're ready to go. We're shipping the full stack for DeFi. There's a whole bunch of things that have to be correct, tested, and stable before we're able to say, okay, it's now suitable for everybody to go consume.
I mean, in many ways, it sounds like we've sort of made it harder for ourselves up front.
Of course we have. This is an incredible amount of stuff to coordinate. This many never before seen products before is, of course, an extraordinary burden. But that's the only way to get crypto out of the basement. You have to change the paradigm. The user experience had to dramatically change. The developer experience had to dramatically change. You're never going to get there with just small little iterations on what has come before. And of course, doing that is difficult, right? It's extraordinarily difficult. I'm extraordinarily happy that we've been able to, that we're able to keep setting very difficult goals and targets and meeting them. And this is one of those things where, when I look back at how far we've come from the early planning days in Olympia, it's unrecognizable how much better off we are and how much more usable the system is, how much more beautiful the user experience is. It's truly incredible.
So, I mean, we quote Vitalik's tweet, and I actually quote Vitalik quite a lot on a lot of things. I think Vitalik's extraordinarily honest, and they had to make some really hard decisions at the start. And I think that a lot of those decisions, they didn't have the ability to be able to look forwards and understand what impact really those decisions would have in a way that you couldn't change, because the mantra of software before blockchain was move fast and break things. And there is this constant pressure in blockchain, in the crypto industry, to just like ship it. And you had this wonderful saying at the end of your blog post that when we launched the delay, which is when we announced the delay, which is Radix is playing for all of the marbles. I just wanted to like understand, is this going to be a constant habit for Radix, or is this a special situation right now?
I mean, certainly this is a special situation, because the initial release of programmability, that you can do, I can deploy my own code to the ledger, is something you don't get to do twice. And more than anything, you want to be sure that you're doing that with a feeling of, I'm not looking at things and going, this is going to bite me later. And because you have deployed code on the network at that point, you can't just go, you know what, we're just going to break everybody who deployed up to this point, right? Of course, you're not going to do that. And that's why distributed ledgers are a different beast than normal software development, because you don't have this ability where you have, well, for old stuff, I'll run some kind of migration process that will, you can't. That's immutable. It's deployed. The whole point is that nobody has the authority to do those things, right? That's bedrock to this whole thing. So for sure, that comment from Vitalik is one we talk about a lot, on just the choices you make the first time you flip the switch on smart contracts are now live. You're living with your architecture forever. You can always do additions. You can always sometimes find ways to back in changes, but fundamentally you are stuck with the architecture decisions you made at that point. So get it right. Don't be 6 months after release going, why did we force for that time? Now we're forevermore, we shall live with this thing that we can't stand. Right. And of course, those kind of things, these are agonizing decisions to make, because you can also go the other direction and you could never ship, right? You can just do, well, it's not quite perfect. And it's very hard to know what's the correct thing. And so you have a lot of conversations, you gather a lot of feedback, you look at a lot of things, you look at where other projects have stumbled, and ultimately you say, this feels right. And that's what we've done.
Yeah. Yeah. And I do feel really confident in that. And it actually, like, the changing culture for Radix around that has been really interesting as well in RDX Works and the development team. Like when Dan started this, there was absolutely the focus on absolute perfection. Either you delivered everything that you possibly could imagine in the best possible way, or you delivered none of it. And then I think we became much more practical, and the saying that sort of permeated was this concept of does not preclude, right? Like this idea that you can make decisions as long as your decisions do not preclude the understanding of where you're trying to get to. And I think that while it can feel from an outside perspective like Radix's ethos of like having to perfect it completely is still playing a part here, I actually don't think that's true at all. I think what we are at now is this point where we have thought very carefully about what needs to be delivered in what order, and we are now at a stage where we are very confident in the Scrypto, in the Radix engine, in consensus, in the way that it's being operated for Babylon, in the Radix wallet, in just so much technology that we've kind of hand-rolled ourselves from scratch with this end state in mind of being like, what good enough is a user experience that can redefine crypto. That doesn't mean it's perfect. That doesn't mean day one everyone goes, oh my God, and it literally channels Jesus to them. That's not actually what we're talking about here. But we're talking about a user experience that can form the bedrock of what is possible for DeFi and Web3, and that does not preclude being able to iterate on that in a way that continues to make crypto, Web3, DeFi more human, more accessible, more everyday. That doesn't mean that day one it's going to be perfect as a user experience. It's not, but it means that the bedrock of what is necessary to deliver what the end state that is necessary for everyone in the world to be using it has been delivered. And that's what makes me really excited.
100%. And we're still going to have a great day one experience. You don't need to soft pedal it. I think it's going to be fantastic. No. But for sure, if people go, where's this thing? We could say it's still coming. We're very careful that we haven't painted ourselves into a corner on anything for meeting all of our extraordinarily ambitious vision.
Right. And I think that the a big reason that we chose to delay was about that as well. It was about making sure that there was a great day one experience.
Absolutely.
Russell, are we going to delay again, or is Babylon coming out on the 27th of?
We are not going to delay again. Babylon will come out on schedule. The list of unknowns has now been worked down, right? And we wanted to make sure that we had a nice buffer for just a stability period, not only for checking things internally, but for everybody in the community developers to have time to say, I have stable interfaces to target, I can get my application knocked into shape, and I can know that when I'm ready to throw the switch at Babylon, that I have, that they didn't feel like they had to rush something out the door to be there early up without the ability to comprehend certain changes that came at the last minute. So this gives us that stability period.
Yeah, which I'm already seeing that extra time for polish that people have now been able to put into their schedules, and the demos that are coming out for the Radix wallet, and there's so much I'm so excited about the world being able to see and play with. So I think giving some extra bake time to the community ecosystem as well. And what's been incredibly exciting for me has been all of the interviews we've done for the Babylon Booster grants. There are so many really impressive teams. Some who are coming across from other networks, some who have built up from within the Radix ecosystem, that are building really well thought through, really interesting applications. Surprisingly, I would have thought that the first thing that people would do would just be a copy and paste, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's probably the low effort way of doing something. But every single application I've seen that is building in the Radix ecosystem is adding concepts to already to good principles, right? So it's not just Uniswap v3 concentrated liquidity. It's Uniswap v3 concentrated liquidity plus 3 or 4 extra features that have been possible, not only to implement this incredibly complicated initial thing, but then to implement these extra elements to it as well. That makes me go, that's the next level. That's the next thing. That's what I would want as a user. And we
saw this in the competitions.
Sorry, say that again.
In the Scrypto challenges that we did, we saw this where people were not just take something that existed somewhere elsewhere. They were, the thing we had said before was before we did our first Scrypto challenge, was that idea that when Ethereum came out, it made things that were previously impossible possible. Like these things where you could deploy code to it and it would just run autonomously from that point on. But it was so hard to do it in a bug-free way that there are many things that were, completely impractical. And one of the big goals with Scrypto was to make things that were impractical now practical. So you could say that, yes, I could do that on Ethereum. Or so it's like, of course you could, but you'd have to be extraordinarily risk tolerant and extraordinarily careful in your testing to try to achieve them. We make many things with Scrypto safe and approachable and easy to comprehend, so you can get much greater complexity in your deployed applications. I was thinking this was going to take many months after Babylon released to get to that point. Yet we found out even in the Scrypto challenges, people were leaping straight to like Gen 2, Gen 3 type applications, having used the language for a couple of weeks. So I cannot wait for all the stuff that's going to come out with Babylon. So many projects operating in, stealth mode at the time for, whatever reasons they have for not wanting to be talking about it in Telegram and the like, but really, really cool stuff.
One of my favorites was just because it's such a complicated protocol, was like some guy who implemented Liquidity, like the entirety of Liquidity, which is like a $700 million like I'd say it's like Gen 3 DeFi, right? Because it's taken the concepts of MakerDAO plus the concepts of a couple of other tokens that have come, like projects that have come after it, and it's really complicated. And he was just like, yeah, I'll do Liquidity. Like basically him and one other guy in 3 weeks. And you're just like, wow, that's mad. So that's why that's the Babylon Boosters grants has made me incredibly positive about not just, I'm already positive about what the day one experience of Babylon's going to be, but now I'm like really positive about what people are going to be launching day one on Babylon. And we're also seeing an uptick on runs on Radix as well. So we've started this campaign around this concept, runs on Radix, which is sort of based on the same idea that Intel pushed forwards when Intel Inside came as a campaign. Mm-hmm. And the whole idea is, look, running on Radix should be a badge of quality for your product. It should tell people, hey, because this is running on Radix, you are going to get a better user experience. You're going to get a safer user experience. You're going to be able to do more things, and it's going to feel easier to do those things than it is on any other network. And this is why we've launched the Runs on Radix campaign. So if anyone who's building on Radix, please do join in and get involved. It helps build the brand. It helps build that sort of consumer trust in what you're doing, and it helps add that extra element of like, hey, I should care about what network something's been built on, because from my perspective, it means that it's less likely to be hacked. It means that I'm going to have a better user experience. It means that transactions are going to clear quicker. It means that I'm going to understand what I'm interacting with. It's going to give me all of these beautiful things that Radix has built into its stack, that now you as a builder who's chosen to build on Radix can signal that immediately to your audience as well.
It's had a really great response. People are loving it from the feedback I see.
Yeah, we're seeing lots of people tweeting it on Twitter already, and lots of teams sort of getting involved, which is fantastic. So, like, to close this out, Scrypto is now feature complete. The new Radix Scrypto Radix engine and node is already live on RCnet v2. Starting from next week, we're going to be testing the migrations from Olympia to Babylon on the Stokenet to make sure that the node runners have got all that in place. We are now in sort of like stabilization and like polishing phase, making sure that the gateway is really solid, making sure that that's giving all of the user experiences that we want for a great day one experience. All of those interfaces that the ecosystem needs to start to build against and to build and test against with confidence are coming into place now, so they'll have plenty of time for when Babylon launches as well. And there is, we're going to be announcing and covering sort of the teams that are building on Radix as well. So please do pay attention to Twitter, pay attention to Telegram. You're going to start seeing us covering some of these these fascinating projects that are coming through on there as well. And as always, thank you so much for listening to us talk at you for an hour. If you've got here at the end, then tweet me the magic word penguin, and I'll know that you are one of the hardcore Radixers who has listened right to the end of this linear roundtable of Russell and I. Russell, thank you so much for being here as well. Alrighty, bye everyone.